Thank you for attending today's hearing on global efforts to counter anti-Semitism. I would like to thank our distinguished witnesses for joining us to offer their expertise and recommendations, and I'd also like to thank Senator Manchin and his office for securing this room for us today. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, is an independent, bipartisan U.S. government advisory body created by the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act, or IRFA. The Commission monitors the universal right to freedom of religion or belief abroad, using international standards to do so. And we then make recommendations, policy recommendations to Congress, to the President of the United States, and to the Secretary of State. Today, as we're gathered here for this hearing, USCIRF is exercising its statutory authority under the law to convene this hearing. We're also very grateful to have with us this afternoon Senator Jacky Rosen of Nevada. Senator Rosen is a tireless advocate working to confront anti-Semitism in all of its forms, and she is also the co-chair of the Senate Bipartisan Task Force for combating anti-Semitism. Senator Rosen, thank you very much for being here today with us, for your commitment to the issue, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much for having me, for bringing everybody here today on these very, very important topics and issues which we're going to talk about. So again, I'm thanking the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom for holding this important hearing. And I thank all of you and all the other participants who cannot be with us today for providing their crucial insight to this important topic. As you said, I'm Senator Jacky Rosen, and I am proud to represent the great state of Nevada in the United States Senate. But I'm also incredibly proud to hold the distinction of being the third Jewish woman in the United States Senate and the first former synagogue president elected to the United States Senate. While it may seem that the world is in disrepair, I have unwavering faith in the capability of Jews and non-Jews alike to do their part to repair the world, to help better the world, to take care of one another, to promote religious freedom, and to diminish hate. So our call to action is this: to keep educating, keep believing, and keep up the fight against hate by encouraging those around us to help repair the world, leave the world a better place than how you found it, to combat bigotry for ourselves, for our children, and for our future. And as we say from generation to generation, this is our call, this is what we must do, and I am proud to have started this and be a partner with all of you. Thank you.
Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, who is the chair of Islamic Studies at the American University here in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I would like to thank the Commission for inviting me to this very important session. I'd especially like to thank my friend, Dr. Harrison Saab. Anti-Semitism to me is like a dense, poisonous fog, which rarely disappears altogether. At times it is thick, and at times it begins to lift. But we know that somewhere it's lurking out there. And I'm saying this because for the last 3 to 4 decades, I have been personally involved in fighting the bigotry that creates anti-Semitism. I would request you to pay heed to this because I'm bringing a different kind of experience. Firstly, I was privileged to be a commissioner in a Runnymede Trust study called A Very Light Sleeper: The Persistence and Dangers of Anti-Semitism. This consisted of some very eminent British Jewish scholars. Although I had some ideas of Jewish history, working on this project opened my eyes to the extraordinary, stirring story of the Jewish people. Through the terrible persecution, the exile, the genocide, the suffering, the community remains steadfast to its faith. And not only was I understanding Jewish history and culture, and a lot of the time I was very ignorant and therefore appreciating my horizons of knowledge opening, but noting that so much of the abuse and attacks on the Jewish community had a familiar ring as I saw them happening to my own community. I believe anyone interested in the topic of anti-Semitism ought to read A Very Light Sleeper. I've given some references below and I hope that they be consulted for the same purpose. The exercise helped me to understand better another phenomenon based in hatred that concerns and threatens my own community, commonly referred to as Islamophobia. A landmark study, again produced by Runnymede, of prejudice against Muslims emerged from this earlier study on anti-Semitism. In 1999, I was invited to deliver the Rabbi Goldstein Memorial Annual Lecture by the liberal and progressive synagogues of the UK at the famous St. John's Wood Synagogue. Again, this was an event which proved historic and broke the ice between the two communities. After 9/11, I was privileged to be part of the first Abraham Summit initiated by Senior Rabbi Bruce Lustig of the Washington Hebrew Congregation and the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, John Chain, over a meal at the rabbi's home. The rabbi, the bishop, and myself visited houses of worship, universities, think tanks, and appeared in mainstream media, including the BBC. I had the honor of speaking at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and found the experience deeply moving. I was also troubled that a lot of people, including my own community, were not aware that this was a national American museum. They thought that this was a Jewish organization meant to propagate or use false propaganda. And people didn't understand that this is something that is American and that, to my mind, should really be compulsory in terms of education, especially for the young generation. I became a charter member of the ADL's Interfaith Coalition on Mosques, which has challenged attacks and assaults on mosques after 9/11. I've worked with the Greater Washington Muslim Jewish Forum, the predecessor to Jamaat, and the Muslim Jewish Council. This work has created a great deal of goodwill among Muslims for the Jewish community. My friend Judea Pearl, whose son Daniel Pearl was so brutally and tragically killed in Karachi in an act of blatant and cruel anti-Semitism, Judea and I traveled the world promoting Jewish-Muslim dialogue to improve understanding. We traveled all over the world, and the high point came when we spoke in the Moses Room, highly symbolic, in the House of Lords in London, in an event hosted by a Jewish, Christian, and Muslim lord. A powerful and successful development in Jewish-Muslim relations came when the renowned scholar, Professor Edward Kessler, appointed Dr. Amine Hoti as the founder director for the first Center for the Study of Muslim-Jewish Relations at Cambridge. Dr. Hoti, with a PhD from Cambridge University, played a significant role in building bridges and therefore checking anti-Semitism by involving women and their families. First time ever it was happening on the ground level. So what were the lessons that I learned? I want to very briefly give a few points, and hopefully they may give us some ideas of how to move ahead. After decades of dealing with the subject, here are the lessons I learned. The first lesson was that anti-Semitism is born of bigotry. Bigotry comes from lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. Very often, people who are anti-Semitic, they may have ideological reasons, ethnic reasons, political reasons, but to me, in the field, I found most of them were coming from a sense of no knowledge, blank knowledge. And that allowed all kinds of stereotypes and tropes to enter their vision of the Jewish community. So I think it's vital that the scholars, especially the Jewish scholars, the rabbis, and I must say I have been deeply impressed by the rabbis. I've had the privilege of meeting some of the most outstanding rabbis probably on this planet, and I have been very, very impressed by their learning, their wisdom, and their compassion. And of course, I have one rabbi sitting on my right. Now, I also found that in these dialogues, very often we have the dialogues, breaking bread in all three traditions is vital. If you want to make friends, if you want to build bridges, break bread. Dr. Amine Hoti initiated this in Cambridge in England, and very quickly she found that the Jewish community, Muslim community, with lots of complaints about each other, by the second and third meal, they were all friends, they were talking about shopping trips, they were talking against their husbands. All sorts of dynamics suddenly began to emerge. So there was a lot that was in common between families. Also, I find that the dialogues that are taking place, thankfully, should be visible and frank. Very often, they're stilted. We try to be good to each other, kind to each other, and we don't bring out the really harsh. There's a lot that is wrong in the Jewish community, in the Muslim community, in other communities, which we must confront, because anti-Semitism, as someone used the expression, is like a tumor. We have to understand, and as a victim, as a patient of this terrible disease, the malady, the emperor of all maladies, you really need to understand that disease to be able to attack it. And I don't think it's being done unless you're very frank. Next point, I noticed you had these terrible incidents, Pittsburgh, then the Hanukkah stabbings, and we got the reaction, the usual reaction, we'll have more guards, we'll have more patrols. I've been a field officer. I've run large parts of Pakistan on the tribal areas. Guards and patrols are not going to change minds, because if there's hatred in people's hearts, that hatred will remain. So you need to clean, you need to challenge the hearts of the people and where this is coming from. And that will happen, that can happen if some of these steps are taken. The media must be involved. The media we all complain about as a terrible source of confusion and hatred. We heard Ambassador Carr talking about the trolls and the venom in it. But it can also be a force of good. There can be documentaries. The platform can be used to promote dialogue, to promote friendship. One of the most powerful symbols happened in terms of Jewish-Muslim dialogue when Rabbi Lustig walked across the stage in the synagogue at the Washington Hebrew congregation during our dialogue and kissed me on both cheeks. And suddenly you had this huge audience, first time, this just after 9/11, seeing a Muslim and a rabbi embracing and the rabbi kissing a Muslim. It had a very powerful effect, and I could see how the Muslim students congregated towards each other. Now, I want to conclude by saying that I've heard this phrase, never again. And in the Holocaust Museum, I repeated it again and again. And I'm sorry to say, we must not be complacent about this. We think we just say never again and go home and nothing happens. The government, you distinguished people running this government, you must make sure that when we say never again, we mean never again. Because it is happening, anti-Semitism, it may not be happening on a vast scale, it's happening too frequently. And to me, that's very alarming. If you have one Jewish person killed, that's too many. And when you have again and again this happening, Pittsburgh, New York, today here, tomorrow over there, we cannot accept it. We must not say never again and not mean it. We must mean it. In conclusion, in the highly complex and interconnected world that we live, we must work together to bring down the temperature. The violence and hatred must not congeal into the new normal. It is the moral obligation of American leaders, regardless of party and other affiliation, to preserve the grand and noble vision of the founding fathers of this great nation. At the heart of that vision lies Jeffersonian religious pluralism. Hatred, bigotry, and violence against minorities are unacceptable. They are unacceptable because they are immoral and they are un-American. Over the years, I've been most impressed, and Senator Rosen cited this. The Judaic phrase, I don't think she used the phrase, but she meant tikkun olam. Am I right, Rabbi?
Got it on the nose.
Thank you. Now, this phrase I learned from my guru, my friend, Lord Jonathan Sacks. It is, I think, something that we all as a civilization, as a world civilization, into the 21st century must use. Christians, Muslims, Jews, tikkun olam, we need to know that the world needs healing, and we will work together, shoulder to shoulder, to go out and heal this world. If you look at the world, it is in such a mess and it's in flames. So there's nothing more powerful for me than this particular image. And as a proud Muslim, let me say that it echoes my own South Asian tradition, in which scholars and Sufis preached and practiced what they called sul-e-kul, which means peace with all. Thank you.
Amen.
Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you all. It's
It's just so helpful and informative for us to hear all your perspectives. Ambassador Ahmed, I was curious about your interfaith work, if you've received hostility for that and how you've dealt with that going forward.
Thank you for asking that question. I received a lot of hostility, as you can imagine, both in the United States and here. Straight after 9/11, when we did this groundbreaking work with Bruce Lustig, the rabbi and the bishop, I got emails, people ringing up, and this carried on. However, I look at the positive side of life, and I also saw, in fact, Judea Pearl used to laugh with me on stage. We used to look at the audiences. We attracted huge audiences. And he would say, look, Akbar, there are only about 10% Muslims and they're all Jews here. And I said, give them a chance and you'll see from 10 it'll become 15, 20, 30%. And that will tilt things. That'll change things. Because unless you get the community involved and you talk to them, you have a dialogue where they feel you're listening to them, they're understanding your problems, nothing really is going to change. And my aim was to try to create that dynamism, that dynamic which would change things. So yes, I think anyone involved in this has to understand that they face challenges from their own community. And let me tell you that some of my rabbi friends and bishop friends also said the same thing, that they also faced resistance from their own community. And you really have to carry on because it's more than just a job or a 9-to-5 kind of action you're taking. It's a belief, it's a commitment that you have. My daughter, Dr. Hoti, who I mentioned, luckily is here with us today. And when she became the first ever director of the only Jewish Muslim center in the world, she got a lot of this hate mail and people ringing up and saying, oh, are you a Zionist agent? And that kind of nonsense. And she rang me. I was in America. She was at Cambridge. And she said, Papa, what do you advise? And I said, look, it's hot in the kitchen. You have to face this because you're facing ignorance. Remember, your primary aim is to see the world as through the lens of compassion and love, which is what we are commanded as Muslims. God constantly tells us to reach out and embrace the world. Now, if other people are interpreting that differently, we have to challenge that. And that is what drives us. And we must remember this word, compassion, which really is at the heart of both Judaism, as far as I can understand, Christianity and Islam. It may be misinterpreted, but that is at the heart of these great faiths.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Ahmed.